I've gone too long without a man, the Apache girl said, lonely cowboy. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the distant mountains, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The wind whispered softly through the tall grass of the wide-open plains. The earth smelled warm and dry, the faint scent of sage drifting on the breeze. Naya, a young Apache girl, walked slowly along a narrow path near the edge of her village. She was tall for her age, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. Her long dark hair, tied loosely behind her back, swayed with each step. There was a quiet strength in her movements, a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the land she had grown up on. But despite the confident way she walked, there was a deep sadness in her heart. Life in the village was simple, predictable, and safe, yet Naya often felt alone. She had friends, cousins, and family who loved her. Yet something was missing. A quiet emptiness lingered inside her, one that no laughter or festival could fill. She had grown up hearing stories of love, of families bound together by trust and care, but somehow those stories felt distant, almost like they belonged to another life. Breath. Naya had always been curious about the world beyond her village. She would often wander along the edges of the plains, her eyes tracing the horizon, imagining the places she might one day visit. The mountains to the west seemed endless, their jagged peaks cutting the sky like the teeth of giants. The rivers sparkled like silver threads in the sunlight, carrying stories of lands she had never seen. Yet no matter how far she dreamed, she returned to the same village, to the same routines, to the same quiet longing in her heart. On this particular evening, as the sun sank lower and the shadows stretched across the earth, Naya wandered further than usual. She followed a narrow creek that twisted through the plains, its water glinting in the fading light. The sound of the flowing stream was calming, almost magical, like a gentle song just for her. Paused, often crouching to touch the cool water, watching the small fish dart away in quick bursts. She listened to the rustle of the grass, the distant call of a hawk, and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Everything seemed alive and full of possibility, yet her heart still felt heavy. As she walked, Naya's thoughts wandered to the stories her grandmother had told her about love and companionship. Her grandmother spoke of hearts finding one another, of two people who could share joys and sorrows, challenges and triumphs. Naya had always listened eagerly, imagining the happiness those connections might bring. But as the years passed, she had realized that love was not something she could force. It came slowly, unexpectedly, and often when the heart was ready for it. And now, standing alone by the creek, she could not deny the truth she had been feeling for years. She had gone too long without someone to share her life with. The words formed in her mind, soft and hesitant at first, and then more certain. "I've gone too long without a man," she whispered aloud, almost surprised that the sound of her own voice startled her.
It was not meant to be heard by anyone else.
It was a confession, a simple acknowledgement of her loneliness, her desire for companionship.
The words felt like a small weight lifting from her chest, like admitting the truth made it a little easier to bear.
She did not notice at first that she was not alone. A figure emerged from the tall grass ahead, moving slowly and deliberately. He was a man, tall and lean, with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. Dust covered his boots and clothes, telling the story of a long journey across the harsh plains. His face was rugged, weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes held a quiet sadness, a depth that spoke of many years of solitude. He carried a small pack over his shoulder and a coiled rope at his side. Eli, the lonely cowboy, had been traveling for days, moving cattle from one grazing land to another. The sun had burned his skin, the wind had dried his lips, and the endless horizon had begun to feel like both friend and foe. He had grown used to seeing no one for hours, sometimes days, and the quiet of the plains had become a constant companion. But even he had felt the weight of loneliness pressing against his chest, a subtle ache that never seemed to go away. When he saw Naya, he hesitated. There was something different about her, something that made him pause in his steady walk. She stood by the creek, her dark eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset, her posture both strong and gentle at the same time. There was an aura of independence about her, a quiet confidence that did not demand attention but naturally drew it. Eli felt a strange curiosity, a pull he could not explain, as if fate had led him to this very spot at this very moment. Naya too noticed him, though she did not step back or show fear. Instead, she looked directly at him, her gaze steady, unflinching. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the sudden awareness that this stranger might understand something she had been longing for. But she did not know his name, his story, or his purpose on the plains. Yet there was a sense of recognition, a feeling that their paths were meant to cross. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind moved between them, carrying the sound of the creek and the rustle of the grass. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the first words to be spoken. Then, almost instinctively, Naya spoke again, her voice quieter this time, filled with both hope and honesty. Breaths.
"I've gone too long without a man," she said, the words simple yet heavy with meaning. Eli blinked, momentarily taken aback.
He had heard many things in his life, stories, confessions, songs, but something about her words, her tone, and the sincerity behind them touched him deeply. It was not a demand or a complaint. It was a statement of truth, a revelation that invited understanding rather than judgment. Breath. He nodded slowly, unsure what to say, yet grateful that the silence had been broken.
They stayed like that for a while. Two strangers standing on the edge of the plains, the creek flowing gently beside them, the sunset painting everything in golden light.
Words were not needed immediately. The quiet was comfortable, almost soothing, a rare moment in a world that often demanded constant motion and noise. For the first time in a long while, Naya felt that perhaps she was not as alone as she had believed. And Eli, who had long grown used to the solitude of the trail, felt a spark of connection he had not experienced in years. As night began to fall, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, Naya finally spoke again. She told him a little about herself, her village, her family, the traditions she held dear, and the stories she had grown up with. She spoke carefully, choosing her words with thought, yet with a warmth that made the conversation feel natural and honest. Eli listened intently, sharing small pieces of his own story in return. Tales of cattle drives, long nights under the open sky, and the quiet life of a cowboy, always on the move. By the time the moon rose, casting a silver glow across the plains, they had shared more than they had anticipated. Their loneliness, once heavy and isolating, had found a companion. The connection was tentative, fragile, yet unmistakable. They both knew that this encounter might be brief, that their paths could diverge as quickly as they had crossed, yet neither wanted the moment to end. Finally, as they prepared to part ways for the night, Eli tipped his hat respectfully, a small smile on his face. Naya returned the gesture, a quiet promise in her eyes that this meeting was only the beginning. Though neither of them could know what the future held, a seed of hope had been planted, one that might grow into something neither had dared to imagine before. Naya lingered by the creek for a while after he left, listening to the water, watching the stars, and feeling the first warmth of possibility in her heart. She realized that perhaps life had a way of answering the silent questions of the heart, of bringing people together when the time was right. And for the first time in a long time, she felt that the loneliness she had carried was not permanent. There was someone out there, a companion, a friend, perhaps even more, who could share in the joys and struggles of life. The plains, endless and golden under the moonlight, no longer seemed empty. And in that quiet, magical moment, Naya allowed herself to hope that her heart might finally find what it had been longing for all along. The morning sun rose slowly over the plains, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and the warm earth after the cool night. Naya woke early, her heart still filled with the memory of the previous evening. She could not forget the lonely cowboy Eli who had suddenly appeared by the creek, or the strange sense of connection she had felt in his presence. Something about him had stirred a feeling she had not experienced in years, a combination of curiosity, hope, and an unspoken understanding. She dressed quickly, choosing clothes that would allow her to move freely through the tall grass. Her steps were light as she made her way back to the creek. The path familiar, yet filled with new meaning. She wondered if he would be there again, though she did not know why she hoped for it. The plains were wide and open and the world was unpredictable. Still, her heart guided her forward, carrying her to the place where water sparkled and life moved quietly in rhythm with the earth. Eli, too, had not forgotten Naya. He had risen before dawn, preparing his horse and supplies for another day on the trail. His mind wandered back to the girl with dark, intelligent eyes, and a voice that had spoken the truth of her heart.
He had seen many people during his travels, but Naya was different.
There was a strength in her that was rare, a quiet confidence mixed with a vulnerability he could not ignore. The memory of her words, "I've gone too long without a man," lingered in his mind, not as a complaint, but as a statement of honesty and courage. By mid-morning, the plains were alive with the sounds of nature. Birds chirped in the trees, insects buzzed among the flowers, and the creek babbled cheerfully as if it had secrets of its own to share. Naya arrived at the creek, hoping against hope that she might see him again. She sat on a flat rock near the water, letting her fingers trail through the cool stream. Time seemed to stretch, and yet she did not feel impatience. The world was quiet, and in that quiet she could think and dream freely. It was not long before Eli appeared. He rode slowly, giving his horse a gentle pat as he approached the creek. The sun caught the dust on his boots, and the movement of his hat as he tipped it briefly revealed his face, lined by the sun and wind but open and honest. When his eyes met Naya's, a small smile crossed his face. It was a smile that held recognition, respect, and the beginning of trust. He dismounted carefully, keeping a safe distance at first, unsure of how she would react. Naya stood as he approached, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She had not expected him to return so soon, and yet there he was, as if the plains themselves had guided him to her. They exchanged cautious greetings, their voices soft but warm. Naya introduced herself properly this time, and Eli did the same. Their names felt important, as if speaking them aloud made the connection between them more real, more grounded. They began to walk along the edge of the creek together, moving slowly so that neither felt rushed. Naya told Eli about her village, describing the simple homes, the gatherings and the traditions that shaped her daily life. She spoke of the dances and the songs, of the elders' wisdom, and the stories that had been passed down through generations. Eli listened intently, fascinated not only by her words but by the way she spoke, full of pride, respect, and love for her heritage. In return, Eli shared tales of his life on the trail. He spoke of endless plains and distant towns, of cattle drives that lasted weeks and nights spent under a sky so full of stars that it felt like the universe had stretched itself just for him. Described the challenges he had faced, the loneliness of traveling alone, and the quiet moments that were both comforting and painful.
Naya listened closely, her eyes wide with interest, imagining the places he had seen and the life he had led.
As they walked and talked, the connection between them grew stronger. It was not a sudden fiery passion, but a gentle understanding, a sense that they could share not only words, but the quiet feelings of their hearts. Naya realized that for the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. She could speak freely, and Eli would listen without judgment or interruption. And Eli, who had grown used to the solitude of the trail, felt a warmth he had thought long forgotten. They paused by a small bend in the creek where the water formed a shallow pool. Naya knelt down and dipped her hands into the cool water, splashing a little onto her face. Eli watched, a small grin forming as he saw her smile. For a moment, the worries of the world, the rules of the village, the demands of the trail, the responsibilities they'd both carried, seemed to fade.
Here by the creek, they were simply two people enjoying the company of each other, sharing a moment of peace and connection.
The conversation soon turned to dreams and hopes. Naya admitted that she often wondered what lay beyond the plains, beyond the mountains, and beyond the routines of her life. She dreamed of seeing the world, of learning new things, and of meeting people who could expand her understanding of life. Eli, in turn, shared his own dreams, not of wealth or fame, but of a life that included meaningful connections, someone to share the quiet moments with, and the hope that the loneliness he had carried might one day be replaced with companionship. As the sun climbed higher, casting bright light across the plains, Naya and Ellie began to feel a sense of comfort in each other's presence. Their conversations flowed naturally, moving from stories of the past to ideas about the future. They laughed together, shared small secrets, and even debated light-heartedly about the best way to cross the plains or the fastest way to herd cattle.
The day seemed endless, and yet it passed too quickly, each moment filled with the warmth of connection they had both longed for.
By late afternoon, the shadows grew longer, stretching across the grass like gentle fingers. Naya and Eli realized that hours had passed without them noticing. The creek had carried them through time almost magically, each conversation deepening their understanding of one another. They both felt a little reluctant to leave, but neither wanted to push the moment. Instead, they agreed to meet again, letting the promise of another encounter hang gently in the air, unspoken but understood. As Eli prepared to ride away, Naya felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. She did not know what the future held, whether he would return or whether their paths would cross again. But for the first time, she felt a spark of hope, a small but powerful flame that whispered of possibilities she had never allowed herself to imagine. Eli, too, felt a sense of renewal. The loneliness he had carried for so long seemed a little lighter, replaced by the warmth of connection and the hope that this new bond might grow stronger. They parted with a simple gesture. A tip of the hat from Eli, a respectful nod from Naya, and a silent understanding that their story had only just begun. As he rode away, Eli glanced back once more, feeling a pull in his heart that told him this meeting was more than chance. Naya watched him disappear into the horizon, her mind alive with thoughts of what might come next. She felt a strange excitement, a mixture of nervousness and curiosity, and a quiet certainty that she had found something rare and valuable, a connection that went beyond words, beyond distance, and beyond the ordinary flow of life. That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains once again and the sky was filled with shades of gold and violet, Naya sat by the creek, thinking about the day. She remembered his stories, his laughter, and the quiet moments of understanding that had passed between them. She realized that the loneliness she had carried for so long no longer seemed permanent. There was someone out there who understood her, who could share not only her joys but also her fears, someone who might one day stand by her side through the challenges and wonders of life. For the first time in many years, Naya felt a sense of anticipation. Life, with all its unpredictability and hardships, seemed brighter, filled with the possibility of companionship and connection. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the creek and the rustle of the wind carry her into a peaceful moment of reflection. In her heart, a small voice whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, the loneliness that had weighed on her for so long was beginning to fade, and that the plains, wide and endless as they were, might finally hold a new story, one of friendship, trust, and the beginning of something beautiful. The days after Naya and Eli first met passed slowly, each one carrying a quiet sense of anticipation. Naya found herself thinking of him constantly. The way his eyes had held a mixture of curiosity and understanding, the gentle tone of his voice, and the warmth that seemed to follow him even across the plains. She tried to continue her daily routine, helping her family, fetching water from the creek, and practicing her skills with the bow and arrow, yet her thoughts kept drifting back to the cowboy who had entered her life so unexpectedly. Eli, too, found it difficult to focus on the usual tasks of the trail. Every time he rode across the plains, he imagined Naya's face among the wildflowers or by the creek, her dark hair catching the sunlight and her eyes reflecting the wide-open sky. He felt a new weight in his chest, not heavy like sadness, but a steady, persistent pull that reminded him of something he had been missing for years. For the first time, he questioned whether a life on the trail, alone and unanchored, was enough. Perhaps there was more to life than the endless horizon and the sound of hooves on dirt. One afternoon, a storm began to gather on the horizon. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, and the wind picked up, rustling the grass and bending the trees. Naya was walking along the creek, gathering herbs for her grandmother, when she noticed the sudden change in weather. She knew she needed to return to the village before the storm broke, but as she looked up, she saw a familiar figure struggling against the wind. It was Eli, trying to make his way across the open plains with his horse, both of them battling the gusts that threatened to push them off balance. Without thinking, Naya ran to meet him. "Brave!" she shouted over the wind, guiding him toward a small, rocky overhang that could serve as temporary shelter. Eli spotted her and nodded in relief, grateful for her presence. Together, they reached the rocks just as the first drops of rain began to fall. The storm hit hard, rain pelting down, thunder rolling across the plains, and lightning splitting the sky in sharp, bright flashes. Under the rocky overhang, they sat close to one another, the shelter protecting them from the worst of the storm. The wind howled outside, and the creek swelled with the sudden downpour, yet inside their small refuge a strange calm settled. Breaths of rain sliding down Eli's dusty coat, and she noticed the tension in his shoulders slowly ease as he realized they were safe. For now. For a long while, neither spoke. The storm created its own rhythm, the sound of rain and wind filling the silence. Naya could feel her heart beating rapidly, not from fear, but from the closeness of someone she had begun to trust deeply. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady over the roar of the storm. She told him about her fears, of losing her family traditions, of the responsibilities that weighed on her young shoulders, and of the loneliness that had accompanied her all her life. Eli listened quietly, his eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the rain. But his attention never wavered from her words. When she finished, he spoke, revealing his own struggles. He told her of the years he had spent alone, moving from one place to another, never staying long enough to form lasting connections. He spoke of friends he had lost along the way, of family he had never known, and of the emptiness that sometimes accompanied the freedom he had always valued. His words were honest and raw, and for the first time Naya realized that beneath his calm, confident exterior, Eli carried a heart much like her own, longing for connection, understanding, and a sense of belonging. As the storm raged on, they shared more than words. They exchanged stories of childhood, small moments of joy and sadness that shaped who they were. Naya spoke of the games she had played as a little girl, the songs her mother had sung to her at night, and the lessons her elders had taught about courage and resilience. Eli recounted the nights he had spent under the stars, the friends he had met along the trail, and the moments of kindness he had received from strangers who had helped him in ways they would never know. The storm seemed to stretch time, making the world outside their rocky shelter feel distant and unreal. For Naya and Eli, there was only the present, the sound of the rain, the warmth of each other's company, and the quiet understanding that had begun to form between them. In that moment, the barriers they had built around their hearts seemed to dissolve. Naya felt safe enough to admit her fears, and Eli felt strong enough to reveal his vulnerabilities. As the hours passed, the storm began to subside. The rain lessened to a gentle drizzle, and the clouds slowly parted, allowing slivers of sunlight to peek through. The world outside was wet and glistening. The plains transformed into a shimmering landscape that reflected the storm's intensity.
Naya and Eli stepped out from their shelter, both feeling a renewed sense of connection.
The storm, with all its fury, had become a shared experience, a challenge they had faced together, and one that had drawn them closer in ways neither had anticipated. Walking side by side along the creek, they continued their conversation, now lighter, filled with laughter and small, teasing remarks. They talked about the animals they had seen, the shapes of clouds overhead, and the way the rain had changed the colors of the plains. Naya noticed how Eli's face relaxed when he laughed, how his eyes sparkled when he shared a funny memory, and how the tension she had felt in the beginning had faded entirely. Eli, in turn, admired Naya's strength and resilience, the way she moved confidently through the world, and the kindness and curiosity that shone through her every word and action. By the time evening approached, the storm had left behind a fresh, clean world. The creek sparkled, the grass glistened with droplets, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of wet earth and flowers. Naya and Eli sat on a large flat rock near the water, watching the sun slowly dip below the horizon. The sky was a masterpiece of colors, deep oranges, pinks, and purples blending seamlessly into the darkening blue of night.
In the quiet of the evening, Naya realized that she had begun to trust Ellie in a way she had not trusted anyone before.
The storm had been more than a test of nature. It had been a test of connection, a challenge that required them to rely on each other and face uncertainty together. And in that test, they had discovered something rare, a bond built on honesty, vulnerability, and mutual respect. Eli, too, felt the weight of the day's events. The storm had reminded him that life was unpredictable and sometimes harsh, but it had also shown him that companionship could bring strength, comfort, and joy even in the most difficult circumstances. He thought of Naya's words, her courage, and her willingness to open her heart, and he felt a growing certainty that this connection was not something to be ignored or left behind. As darkness fell, the first stars appeared in the sky, twinkling faintly like distant lanterns. Naya and Eli sat together, sharing the silence, letting the peacefulness of the plains settle around them. They did not need to speak. The presence of each other was enough. In that quiet moment, they understood that life was no longer about being alone. They had found in each other a companion, someone who could understand, support, and share in both the joys and struggles of life. Finally, as the night grew colder, they decided it was time to return to their separate paths. Eli would need to continue his journey along the plains, and Naya would return to her village before it became too late. Yet, as they parted, there was no sadness, only a sense of anticipation and hope. They knew that their story was just beginning, that the bond they had formed during the storm was strong enough to endure distance and challenges. Naya watched Eli disappear into the shadows of the plains, feeling a warmth in her heart she had never known before. She knew that loneliness no longer ruled her life, that connection and understanding had found their way to her through an unexpected meeting and a shared storm. And Eli, riding quietly along the open plains, felt a similar sense of renewal, a reminder that even the hardest trails could lead to moments of beauty, friendship, and the possibility of love. The storm had tested them, but it had also revealed something essential: the importance of trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to open one's heart. Naya and Eli had passed that test, and in doing so they had taken the first steps toward a bond that might one day become unbreakable. As the plains stretched endlessly around them, both felt a quiet certainty that life, though unpredictable, was now a little brighter, a little warmer, and infinitely more meaningful. The days following the storm were quieter, but the tension between Naya and Eli grew in a subtle, almost invisible way. Though their connection had deepened, they now faced a reality neither could ignore.
Aya's village was small, bound by tradition and closely watched by elders who valued rules above all else.
Though they had always treated her with respect, the elders had specific expectations for the young women of the community, expectations that often left little room for friendships, let alone bonds with outsiders. Naya felt the weight of these expectations more and more each day, but she wanted to see Eli, to share stories and moments with him. But every visit risked scrutiny and criticism. Her heart longed for the companionship they had begun to nurture, yet her mind reminded her of the rules she had grown up with. The villagers were kind, but they were cautious, protective, and quick to warn of dangers that could come from outsiders. Naya struggled with a choice: follow her heart or obey the expectations that had guided her life for so long. Eli faced a challenge of his own. Life on the plains had taught him independence, resilience, and the freedom to make decisions without consulting anyone else. For years he had traveled alone, with only the endless horizon as his companion. The idea of forming a bond, of staying in one place long enough to care for another person, was both comforting and frightening. He had never known what it meant to truly rely on someone else, to share his life so intimately, and yet he could not deny the pull he felt toward Naya, the desire to be near her, to protect her, and to share both the simple and significant moments of life together. One afternoon, as the sun began its slow descent behind the western mountains, Naya and Ellie met near the creek once more. The golden light bathed the plains, making the tall grass shimmer like liquid gold. Proud, Naya had prepared herself to speak honestly about her worries, but the moment Ellie appeared, her courage faltered. She wanted to hide her fears, to pretend that nothing was wrong, but Eli's warm, steady presence gave her strength. They walked together along the creek, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Naya spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Ration.
Eli, I want to see you, but I do not know what the village elders will say. They have rules, expectations.
And I cannot ignore them. If they knew I spent so much time with you, it might cause problems. Not just for me, but for my family. Her eyes searched his, filled with both hope and fear. Eli stopped walking and looked at her, the seriousness of her words sinking in. Bet. He had never wanted to cause harm or tension, yet he now realized that their bond was not without consequences. I understand, Naya, he said softly. I never meant to bring trouble to you or your family, but I cannot pretend that I do not care for you.
I have been alone for too long, and I need to be near someone I trust.
You. His words were honest, vulnerable, and heavy with meaning. Naya's heart ached with the weight of the decision before her. She wanted to follow her heart, to continue spending time with Eli, yet the thought of defying the expectations of her village brought fear. She worried not only for herself but for the people she loved. The elders had been kind, but they were cautious, and they often acted quickly to prevent what they perceived as danger. Branch. She did not want to disappoint them, nor did she want to bring shame or worry to her family. Eli reached out and gently took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Naya, I do not want to force you into anything, but I also do not want to ignore what is here between us. We can find a way, carefully, quietly, so that we do not bring harm, but still allow ourselves to be together. His voice carried a calm certainty, a promise that he would respect her boundaries while remaining a steady presence in her life. Despite his reassurance, Naya felt the internal struggle intensify. She had never been one to hide her feelings, yet the situation required caution, patience, and careful thought. She knew that a single wrong step could lead to consequences she could not control. At the same time, the thought of stepping away from Eli, of retreating into the life she had always known, made her heart ache in a way she had not anticipated. Over the next few days, they began a careful dance of proximity and distance, They met at the creek early in the morning or late in the evening, moments when few eyes could watch them. They spoke quietly, sharing stories, laughter, and small insights into their lives. Each meeting strengthened their bond, yet also reminded them of the fragile balance they were maintaining. Every glance carried unspoken questions. Every laugh was shadowed by the awareness of potential consequences. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky was painted with brilliant oranges and purples, Naya finally voiced her fears aloud.
Eli, what if the elders find out? What if they do not understand us? Her eyes glistened with unshed tears.
I do not want to lose you, but I also cannot ignore the rules I have lived by my whole life. Eli knelt beside her, his gaze steady and unwavering. Naya, I will not leave you.
We will find a way to be together that does not bring harm to you or your family. I promise you that.
His voice was full of warmth and determination. I have been alone for too long. I know now that some risks are worth taking, if it means being with someone who truly matters. You matter to me. Naya's heart swelled with a mixture of hope and fear. She wanted to trust him completely, to follow the pull of her feelings, but caution whispered constantly in her mind. She thought of her family, her friends, and the traditions that had guided her life. How could she reconcile the rules she had always known with the desires she now felt? The question seemed impossible to answer. Yet she knew one thing with certainty. Eli had awakened something in her heart that could not be ignored. In the following days, the challenges of their growing bond became more apparent. Rumors began to circulate in the village. Small whispers about Naya spending more time near the creek, about the stranger she had been seen with. Though no one spoke directly to her, Naya could feel the weight of watchful eyes, the subtle tension that grew with each passing day. She feared that one misstep could undo everything, yet the thought of stepping away from Eli, even temporarily, seemed unbearable. Eli, sensing her worry, suggested they slow down, to take smaller steps and focus on the present rather than the unknown future. They spent their days talking, laughing, and quietly enjoying the comfort of each other's presence, while carefully avoiding attention. They explored the plains together, learned small skills from one another, and shared dreams of a life where freedom and love could coexist. With each passing day, their trust grew, but so did the awareness that the path ahead was uncertain and full of challenges. One evening, after a particularly long day of walking and talking, Naya and Ellie sat atop a small hill overlooking the plains. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the faint promise of rain. Naya rested her head on Eli's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence, and whispered softly, I do not know what will happen, but I know I do not want to lose this. Us. Eli held her close, his voice low and reassuring. Neither do I, Naya. We will face whatever comes together. The rules, the challenges, the fears, they are part of life. But we can navigate them as long as we have each other. In that quiet moment, they understood that life would not be simple or predictable. The challenges they faced were real, and the risks were not imaginary. Yet they also realized that the connection they shared was rare and precious. It required courage, patience, and unwavering trust. But it was worth every difficulty. As the sun set behind the mountains and the sky darkened into deep shades of blue, they stayed together atop the hill, the world stretching endlessly around them. The plains were no longer simply a vast, empty space. They had become a landscape of possibility, a place where trust, hope, and love could grow. Both Naya and Eli knew that the days ahead would be filled with tests, but they also knew that they had already taken the first steps toward a bond that might withstand anything. For Naya, the struggle between heart and duty continued, but she felt stronger with Eli by her side. For Eli, the realization that he could care deeply for someone and still honor their boundaries was both humbling and enlightening. Together, they had discovered that the path to connection was not without obstacles, but it was a path worth walking, even if every step required caution, bravery, and patience. As night fell and stars began to twinkle above, Naya and Eli parted once more, each carrying the hope and determination that their bond could survive the challenges ahead. The plains, vast and open, were still filled with uncertainty, but their hearts had found a companion in each other, a presence that made the world feel less lonely and far more alive. The days had grown warmer, and the plains were alive with the soft hum of life. Birds sang from the trees, insects buzzed through the air, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. Naya stood by the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones, and thought about how much had changed in just a few short weeks. She remembered the first time she had met Eli, a lonely cowboy who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Back then, she had been unsure of her feelings, unsure if she could ever trust someone new, especially someone from beyond her village. But now, everything felt different. The awkwardness and caution that had once shadowed their meetings had given way to a deep, comforting bond.
Their conversations were no longer just about sharing stories or laughter. They had begun to understand each other on a level that went far beyond words.
Naya had started to see the world through new eyes, through the experiences Eli had shared, through the quiet courage he carried, and through the steady warmth of his presence. And Eli, for his part, had discovered that companionship, trust, and love could bring richness to life he had never imagined. That morning, Naya had arranged to meet him earlier than usual. Bear. She had spent hours considering what she would say, but in the end, her heart guided her more than her thoughts. She walked along the creek, her bare feet brushing against cool stones, feeling the water splash lightly around her ankles. The sunlight caught the ripples in the water, creating tiny dancing lights that seemed to celebrate the new beginning she sensed was close. Eli arrived shortly after, his horse moving slowly so as not to startle her. When he saw her, a smile spread across his face. Warm, genuine, and full of the same hope that danced in her heart. He dismounted carefully, brushing the dust from his clothes, and approached her with a quiet confidence that always made her feel safe. There was a familiarity in their routine, a rhythm that had grown naturally from their repeated meetings. Yet today felt different. There was a certain weight, a sense that this day might mark a turning point.
"Good morning, Naya,"
Eli said softly, his voice carrying the gentle warmth she had grown to depend on. You seem brighter than usual. Naya laughed lightly, feeling the tension in her chest ease. Maybe it's the sun, or maybe it's because I'm happy to see you, she replied, meeting his gaze. The sunlight glinted in her dark eyes, and Ellie felt a surge of affection he could hardly put into words. They walked together along the creek, sharing small talk, but their conversation soon shifted to more serious topics. They spoke of the days ahead, of what it might mean to truly commit to one another despite the challenges. Naya admitted her fears, of disapproval, of village rules, and of the uncertainty that life often brought. Ellie listened with patience and understanding, never rushing her, never dismissing her feelings.
"I know it won't be easy," Naya said finally, her voice barely above a whisper.
There are rules and expectations I cannot ignore. But I also know that I cannot ignore what I feel for you. My heart has found something it has wanted for a long time, and it is too strong to let go. Eli took her hand gently, holding it with a steady warmth. Naya, I do not ask you to give up your life or your duties. But I do ask you to trust me, to let us take steps together. We can find a balance between your world and mine, between your traditions and our connection. The words carried a quiet weight, a promise that eased the fears that had troubled her for weeks. For the first time, Naya realized that love did not always demand abandonment of everything familiar. Sometimes it required courage, compromise, and a willingness to face the unknown together. Breath. And she knew, deep in her heart, that Eli's presence had taught her exactly that.
Over the next few days, they worked together to find small ways to strengthen their bond without causing concern for Naya's village.
They explored areas of the plains that were less frequented by others, shared meals together under the shade of old trees, and exchanged stories and laughter that carried long into the evening. Each shared experience built trust, deepened understanding, and cemented the feeling that they were no longer alone in the world. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Naya and Ellie found themselves sitting atop a gentle hill, looking out over the endless plains. The air was warm, filled with the soft scents of the season, and the silence between them was comfortable, filled only with the gentle sounds of nature.
Naya, Eli said softly, breaking the silence, I want you to know that I am serious about this, about us.
I will not force you to do anything, but I will stay by your side as long as you want me to. We can face anything together.
Naya felt her heart swell. She leaned into him slightly, resting her head against his shoulder.
I feel the same, Eli. I know it won't be simple, but I also know that what we have is worth everything.
I want to face life with you, whatever comes. They stayed there as the stars began to twinkle above, the sky a deep, endless blue, each one shining like a tiny promise of hope. The plains stretched endlessly around them, vast and open, yet no longer empty. The world, once lonely and uncertain, now felt full of possibilities.
In the days that followed, they became more intentional about the bond they shared.
Naya's family, noticing her growing happiness and calm, began to see the change in her demeanor. Though they were cautious at first, they could not deny the sincerity in her eyes or the warmth of her smile.
Psst. Slowly, they came to understand that Eli was not a threat, but a companion who respected Naya, her heritage, and her values. Eli, too, adapted to a new rhythm.
Breaths. But he did so with a renewed sense of purpose. Life on the trail had been solitary, but now it had meaning beyond mere survival. Each day carried opportunities to share experiences, offer support, and deepen the connection that had grown between them. The plains, which had once echoed with his solitary steps, now resonated with shared laughter, whispered secrets, and moments of quiet reflection, bathed the landscape in golden light. Naya and Eli stood at the creek, hands intertwined, watching the water ripple over smooth stones. Naya turned to him, her eyes shining.
I never imagined my life could feel like this, she said softly. I thought I was destined to be alone for a long time.
But you've changed everything. Brushing a strand of hair from her face. And you've changed me, Naya. I thought I was content with my life on the trail, alone and free. But now I know that freedom without companionship is only half a life. With you, it feels complete. The words hung in the air like a gentle promise, filled with the weight of truth and sincerity. For the first time, both of them felt a sense of resolution, a quiet understanding that their journey together had only just begun, but that they were ready to face the future with courage, hope, and love. As the days turned into weeks, their bond grew stronger.
They faced small challenges together, the occasional disapproving look from a villager, the unpredictability of the weather, the demands of life on the plains. But each challenge strengthened their trust and commitment.
They learned to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's needs, and to support one another through moments of doubt and fear. Finally, one evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of red and gold, Naya and Ellie sat together on their favorite hill. The wind rustled gently through the grass, carrying the soft scent of wild flowers. Naya rested her head on Eli's shoulder and whispered, "I've gone too long without a man, but not anymore." Eli held her close, a sense of peace settling over them both. "Not anymore," he repeated softly. "We've found each other, and that's all that matters." The plains stretched endlessly around them, but they no longer felt lonely or empty. The world was alive with possibilities, hope, and shared dreams. Together they had faced storms, uncertainty, and fear, and emerged stronger, bound by trust, love, and mutual respect. As night fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Naya and Eli remained on the hill, hand in hand, hearts aligned and minds filled with the promise of the future. They knew that life would continue to challenge them, that the path ahead would not always be smooth, but they also knew that together they could face anything. Breath. And in that quiet, magical moment under the endless sky, they felt the fullness of life for the first time. A life shared, a bond formed, and a love that had been worth the wait. The plains, once vast and lonely, were now a canvas for their story, a story of trust, courage, and the quiet, enduring power of companionship.